The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army.
So this weekend I was traveling. I traveled down to Fort Lauderdale, Florida, Boynton Beach, Florida, and Deerfield-Beach, Florida, and had speaking engagements in each city, great events. Had a wonderful time, especially going back to South Florida. It is so unnecessarily beautiful. You forget how beautiful it is, particularly when you live there. You take it for granted. I lived in Florida for at least 14 years. I don't know. I lost track. But it was an extremely beautiful state, South Florida, and it's just amazing. But when you're there, you take it for granted, and you don't really notice how beautiful it is until you've been gone for like 10 years. And that was the case. But this weekend, I had a chance to speak for the city of Deerfield Beach and their Heritage Festival, their Black Heritage Festival, and it was a pretty cool event. With the one exception, they told me to prepare to give them a 30-minute speech, and I'm like, okay, that's cool, because I'm not going to speak longer than 20 minutes. That's usually, when I speak, 20 minutes is about my attention span. Well, when I got there, they were like, okay, can you just do 10 minutes for us? Because, we're on a tight schedule. I'm like, look here. You're going to get this 20-minute speech that I prepared. But, ultimately, I was going to try to do 10 minutes, but it ended up being 20 minutes anyway. So, but besides that, it was a wonderful event. So many people there, wonderful stage and setting, and it was really great. I spoke the next day at a church that I used to work for, and they are also having a Black Heritage. It's Black History Month, so everybody's doing something about Black history, and so I talked about the same thing I talk about on the air with you all, about the heritage, the culture of Black Americans, the struggle to identify, at least in the eyes of some people, there's a struggle to see the culture of Black Americans, and the conversation that you get from deeply racist Americans who always say, go back to Africa, the realization that based on immigration patterns, Africans who were kidnapped and brought to America have been here longer than most white Americans here today. Just by sheer virtue of the numbers of Africans who were, online, they call it, they immigrated to the United States. We know it was slavery. Before 1790, you had 100,000 more Africans than any other country come into America. And, of course, after the end of the transatlantic slave trade, you had a subsequent decrease, a tremendous drop-off, because there weren't any Black people immigrating to the United States during Jim Crow. So, that was the conversation that I had, and that's one that I've really been focusing on a lot lately. But something interesting came up in the conversations, the speeches that I had this weekend, particularly at the church that I spoke at. And the conversation really went on to be about bigotry in general, discrimination in general, and then discrimination not only against the Black community, but discrimination against the LGBTQ community as it exists in the Black church. Discrimination from the Black church against Black Christians against the LGBTQ community. And, I thought about that because, when I grew up in the Black church. And the Black church is extremely homophobic. The irony of it is that the Black church is full of gay and lesbian Black people. And I always find it fascinating when hoteps or Black nationalists or people who are, really promote the Black patriarchy. I find it hilarious when they talk about and they attack the gay community as if there's not a huge gay community in the Black community, right? As if Black people can't possibly be gay. I find it amazing because some of the greatest leaders that we've had in our community, some of the people who made all of the difference in the Black freedom struggle, they were gay or they were lesbian. So it's like, there's a rewrite that happens in the black community with regard to the LGBTQ community, as though black people have never been gay. And I'm like, how, Sway? That's so ahistorical and unnecessarily bigoted, considering this is 2018. We really should have progressed past that. But in context of the black church, it's still a religion-based thing. It's still, and not even so much religious as it is just pure homophobia. And it's something that I actually had to grow out of myself. I think I've told you this before. It's in my book. I had to personally come to grips with my own bigotry with regard to the LGBTQ community that was based on religious dogma, and grow out of that, and became who I am today. Where I am today is, and actually the reason I'm talking about this is twofold. There's a piece of legislation that passed in Georgia that is allowing adoption agencies to ban LGBTQ couples. That's really the impetus behind my train of thought this morning. And I'm going to be short this morning because I am still traveling, but I had to pull over so that I could discuss this, and in context of my weekend. So you have this happening in Georgia, and you have so many cases of children who live in our system with no family unit. They grow up in foster care. They grow up in group homes. And yet we are banning LGBTQ couples from adopting. So it's simultaneously bigotry, but also a complete lack of empathy for the children, willing to leave them in a system that is not designed to be nurturing. It's designed to just give them this just to provide subsistence, just enough for them to survive, but no love, no compassion, no healthy home. So we would rather leave them in a system like that than to allow them to be go into homes of loving LGBTQ couples. It's fascinating to me. I don't want to call out the hypocrisy, but I will. It's low-hanging fruit, but I have to state the obvious. People who swear that they are pro-life all of a sudden have no concern or no regard whatsoever for the children after they're born, to the extent that they would rather leave them inside of a cold system, a system that is completely devoid of any nurturing values, any nurturing or redeeming features that could actually help raise a healthy individual, with the exception of the occasional foster parent that is above and beyond, right? They go above and beyond and they become this loving individual. But the system is not designed to mass produce healthy children. And you would rather leave them in that than to allow them to grow up in a loving home just because there are two dads in that home or there are two moms in that home. It's a fascinating thing what we will allow to happen simply because of our bigotry. And so this weekend when I was it wasn't a conversation at the church. It was actually a conversation after I got done speaking at that church, and speaking with some old friends, and conversations just in general about just about the LGBTQ community. And you know what my conclusion was, and they heard me, and I my conclusion is the same no matter where I go now. In terms of love, life is entirely too short to give one damn about what people think about who you love. Life is too short. Love whoever this. I know this might be coming out of left field in the context of the conversation, but this is really if somebody makes you happy, love that person. Don't care what anybody religious says. Don't care what society says. Don't care what I don't even care what the law says. We're finally at the place where same-sex couples can get married, right? But that's so brand new. I have to remind myself, right? That just happened, right? But life, people are dying, dropping dead every single day. Who really cares about who you love? Just love who you want to love, man, and enjoy your life. I don't have time to be inserting I'm too busy trying to make sure that my life is happy. I don't have time to be inserting myself into someone else's life and trying to control who they love and trying to control what they do in their bedroom. Ultimately, it's none of my business, but I'm only inserting myself right now to say, man, ladies, gentlemen, non-gender conforming individuals, whoever makes your life happy as long as they are a consenting adult. Don't ever hide who you are. Don't ever deny who you are for the sake of trying to fit in and conform to someone else's values. I'm sorry. This is my heart's plea right now to every single person. If you are still having to hide who you are for the sake of anybody in your family, but most of all, religion. I know this might be surprising to some people to think that this conversation is even necessary, but can I tell you this conversation is necessary? Do not allow anyone to pigeonhole your happiness. I wish it was that easy for me to say this about children who are in foster care, because if these kids had a say, I'm sure these kids would say, send me to any home that's going to be loving. State of Georgia. But unfortunately, that's not how it works. And so now, and I'm quite sure Governor Deal in Georgia is going to sign it because he's as conservative as they come. But sadly to say, this is still where we are. We're still answering these questions. There's still a lot of people who haven't come to terms with their own personal bigotry. And bigotry is not a bad word. It doesn't make you at your core a bad person. It's what do you do with your bigotry that counts, right? I was bigoted when with regards to the LGBTQ community. I'm not a bad person. I grew out of that, right? So people are like, oh, you're calling me a bigot. Yes, because you're demonstrating, or you are being bigoted. So what are you going to do with that bigotry is the question. Are you going to stay in it? Are you just going to allow it to linger? You're going to allow it to fester? You're going to make it worse? I mean, really, talk to me. Are you comfortable in that bigotry? Are you going to justify that bigotry? Are you going to use your cherry-picked scriptures to continue to justify that bigotry and completely pay no attention to everything else that your scripture says that you're doing, right? That condemns how you're living? The selective cherry-picking of scriptures to make your life okay, but everyone else's life is not? And then ultimately, at the end of the day, I don't care. I don't care what anybody says. You should not care what anybody says. Life is just too short to be concerned with what somebody else thinks about who you love. I only have two rules: that they be adults and that they are consenting adults. That's it. Love who you want to love, and hopefully, at some point in the near future here in the state of Georgia, we can reverse this uber bigoted piece of legislation that just passed that ultimately is going to hurt the children of Georgia more than anyone else, all for the sake of coddling the bigotry of some deeply religious people who are selectively religious, who want to tell you what to do in your bedroom, but don't want you to pay any attention to what they're doing in their bedroom. Isn't that something? And it's funny how they use God to justify that. And I could really just take this over to everything else, right? They want you to believe that there's a God who is concerned about what's going on in your bedroom, but not concerned about what's going on in the boardroom of corporations and banks, right? God is concerned about what's going on in what a woman does with her body, but not concerned about what banks are doing to the poor people across the country, right? It's amazing how they have crafted a religion that perfectly serves a political party's agenda, that perfectly serves one myopic view of the world, and conveniently forgets about everything else that contradicts who they are, what they represent, both socially and economically. But that's another story for another day that I've told before, but I'm going to have to keep telling again. But for now, I'm just really upset about this legislation out of Georgia and how it's going to hurt young people just despite LGBTQ couples and ultimately this lingering bigotry that exists in the black community. It's getting better, though. One thing I will give props to the black community for is where they have a problem still with same-sex marriage. At the same time, they don't want same-sex marriage and LGBTQ couples to be discriminated against. So there's this cognitive dissonance that at the same time, they don't want to see any discrimination whatsoever, but they still have to come to terms with their view of the world because of the lens through which they view religion. Right? So they're in the stage of cognitive dissonance, and really in terms of development, cognitive dissonance can be a wonderful thing so long as you get the right resolution. What happens with conservatives so often is that they exist in this world of cognitive dissonance, and then once they resolve that tension that's in their head, the competing ideas that are existing in their brain at the same time, they usually come up with some of the most ignorant resolutions that anyone can imagine. Right? But cognitive dissonance isn't a bad thing. It's just, it actually can produce fascinating and wonderful growth. And so right now we see cognitive dissonance in the black community just by the numbers, right? You can see by the numbers of black Christians who approve of same-sex marriage is a lower percentage than the black people who oppose discrimination against the LGBTQ community. So there is progress, but there's simultaneously cognitive dissonance. And the question is how do we resolve it? Well, if I'm spreading my message, we resolve it by just minding your business, supporting liberties and freedom and rights for everyone. And then ultimately, life is too short to try to pretend that you're something that you're not, to have to hide who you are, or even for you not to just simply be who you want to be and love who you want to love. I don't care about anything else but other people, you people. Just be happy. Just be happy with consenting adults. Period. So that's it's a process, and there's a way forward for the black religious community. At this point, once we get that, if we could show them how to resolve that cognitive dissonance, then, there's nothing more powerful. Let me tell you, the reason I don't throw in the towel on the black church community, if you understood the historical significance of the black church in the civil rights movement, and not just civil rights for African Americans, but the civil rights movement across the board. There's a revolutionary, radical, subversive spirit that's in the black church just by default. Now, it may be dormant right now because the evangelicals kind of infiltrated and got black churches more concerned with prosperity and money. There's plenty of research to assert this, particularly research by Melissa Harris Perry, who used to host on MSNBC. Her research is in the area of the radical tradition of the black church and how significant it was in moving the civil rights movement and changing of the face of this nation. And then a dramatic shift that took place once evangelicals really got hold of the black tradition and substituted it with the prosperity gospel. And so we're at the tail end of the effects of the prosperity gospel. And the question is where do we go from here? Well, if you reignite that revolutionary spirit in the black church, you think you've seen some change. But there's still some things that have to be overcome. There's still, some problems that have to be overcome in the structure of the patriarchy, the patriarchal nature of the black church, and again, the lingering homophobia that exists across the board in the black church. And I think the biggest hurdle of them all, not even the patriarchal structure, not even the homophobia, but is actually going to be to reignite the revolutionary radical spirit of the black church, because it's been laying dormant because of the imposition of the prosperity gospel, or the substitution of liberation gospel for prosperity gospel. But all in all, those are my thoughts from this very long weekend. I was traveling Friday. I'm traveling today. I'm getting back to Atlanta soon, and I will be back with a regular full podcast on tomorrow. Some updates that I need to give you with regard to content news really is not pertinent for our show. What we do, and this, we continue to do, the Benjamin Dixon Show, that won't change. And I'll give you updates on content news for those of you who watched Like It or Not with me and Rebecca Azor. I'll give you some updates probably tomorrow once some things are finalized on our end. But other than that, I have to travel and get back to Atlanta. Have a great day, everyone. See you tomorrow.
The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army.